I expected apologies, explanations, maybe even another fight. What I got instead left me speechless. The elevator made its familiar creaking sound as it climbed to the 7th floor. Jake pressed his back against the cold metal wall and closed his eyes for a moment. Another 12-hour day at the office was finally behind him, but the tiredness felt different today. It wasn't just about work anymore. His phone buzzed in his pocket. For a split second, his heart jumped, thinking it might be her. But it was just a notification about his credit card bill. He shoved the phone back into his pocket without looking at it properly. The hallway to his apartment felt longer than usual. Each step echoed off the walls, making the silence feel even heavier. He fumbled with his keys at the door, dropping them once before finally getting the lock to turn. The apartment greeted him with darkness and stillness. No music playing from the kitchen, no smell of dinner cooking, no shoes kicked off carelessly by the entrance, just emptiness. Jake flicked on the lights and looked around. Everything was exactly where he had left it that morning. The coffee cup he forgot to wash still sat on the counter. The book he had been reading lay open on the couch, bookmark hanging out like a tongue. Even the small plant by the window looked a bit sad, drooping slightly toward the glass. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since Lisa moved out to stay with her cousin across town. 3 weeks since their big fight about where their relationship was heading. 3 weeks of coming home to this quiet apartment that suddenly felt too big for just one person. He walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Half-empty containers stared back at him. Leftover pizza from 2 days ago. A carton of milk that was probably going bad soon. Some vegetables that Lisa had bought before she left, now looking wilted and forgotten. Jake grabbed the milk and sniffed it. Still good. He poured himself a glass and stood there in the bright refrigerator light listening to its low hum. Funny how you notice sounds differently when you're alone. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked. Cars passed by, on the street below, but no human sounds, no laughter, no conversation, no life. He closed the refrigerator and the kitchen fell back into shadows. The living room looked strange in the dim evening light coming through the windows. Their couch suddenly seemed too big. The TV stared back at him like a black mirror, reflecting his tired face. Jake collapsed onto the couch and grabbed the remote. He flipped through channels without really watching anything. News about traffic problems, a cooking show about making fancy desserts, some movie he had seen before but couldn't remember the ending to. Nothing held his interest. His mind kept wandering back to that night 3 weeks ago. They had been talking about moving in together officially. Well, arguing was more accurate. Lisa wanted to know where things were going. She wanted to talk about the future, about marriage, about kids someday. Jake had felt pressured, cornered. He said he wasn't ready to think about all that serious stuff yet. But sitting here now in this empty apartment, he wondered if he had been wrong. Maybe he was ready. Maybe he had just been scared of making the wrong decision. Maybe he had been scared of making any decision at all. The worst part was how the fight had ended, not with yelling or door slamming, but with silence. Lisa had just looked at him with disappointment in her eyes and said she needed some space to think. She packed a bag quietly while he sat on this same couch, too stubborn to say anything that might fix things. Jake reached for his phone. He had started typing messages to her dozens of times over the past few weeks. "Hey, how are you doing?" Delete. "I've been thinking about what you said." Delete. "Can we talk?" Delete. Every message felt wrong, too casual or too serious or too desperate. He scrolled through their old text conversations instead, photos from their weekend trip to the mountains last month, silly messages about what to have for dinner, inside jokes that made him smile even now. It all seemed like a different lifetime. The apartment felt smaller and bigger at the same time. Smaller because there was less life in it, but bigger because the silence seemed to fill every corner. Jake realized he had gotten used to sharing space with someone, used to considering another person when making plans, used to having someone to talk to about his day, even if it was boring. He got up and walked to the window. The city spread out below him. Thousands of lights and windows where other people were living their lives. Some probably coming home to families. Others maybe dealing with their own relationship problems. Others sitting alone like him, wondering if they had made mistakes. A couple walked by on the sidewalk below, holding hands and laughing about something. Jake watched them until they disappeared around the corner. He remembered walking like that with Lisa, comfortable and happy, not knowing that everything could change so quickly. The clock on the wall showed 8:30, still early enough to do something productive. He could clean the apartment. He could call his brother back. He had missed 2 calls from him yesterday. He could go to the gym like he kept promising himself he would. Instead, he just stood there by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the growing darkness. Sometimes the hardest part about being alone wasn't the big moments, but the small ones. Having no one to share a funny comment with while watching TV. No one to ask if the milk smelled okay. No one to say goodnight to. Just as Jake was about to turn away from the window, he heard something that made his heart stop. A soft knock at the door. Not the aggressive knock of a delivery person or neighbor. This was gentle, almost hesitant. He froze, listening to make sure he hadn't imagined it. Then it came again. 3 soft knocks. Jake walked slowly toward the door, his heart beating faster with each step. He looked through the peephole and felt his breath catch in his throat. It was Lisa. Jake stood frozen at the peephole for what felt like forever. His hand was halfway to the door handle, but he couldn't make himself move. Part of him wondered if he was seeing things. Maybe he was so tired and lonely that his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, it was definitely her. She stood in the hallway wearing that blue jacket he had bought her for her birthday last year. Her dark hair was pulled back in a way that meant she had been thinking hard about something. That's what she always did when she was nervous or trying to make a difficult decision. Jake took a deep breath and slowly turned the lock. The sound seemed incredibly loud in the quiet hallway. He opened the door just enough to see her face clearly. "Hi," Lisa said softly. Her voice was different than he remembered, quieter, more careful. "Hi," Jake replied, not knowing what else to say. They stood there looking at each other across the doorway like strangers meeting for the first time. Lisa looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "Can I come in?" Jake stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. She walked past him into the living room, and he caught a hint of her perfume. The same one she had worn for years, the one that always reminded him of Sunday mornings and lazy conversations over coffee. She stopped in the middle of the room and looked around. Everything was exactly the same as when she left, except for the coffee cup on the counter and the book still open on the couch. Her eyes lingered on these small signs of his life without her. "You haven't been eating much," she said, noticing the lack of dishes or food containers around. Jake shrugged. "Haven't been very hungry lately." The silence stretched between them again. Jake closed the door and walked into the living room, keeping some distance between them. He wanted to ask her 100 questions. Why was she here? What did this mean? Had she been thinking about him too? But the words felt stuck in his throat. Lisa walked over to the window where Jake had been standing just minutes before. She looked out at the city lights, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "I've been staying at my cousin's place," she said, still looking out the window. "She has this tiny apartment with paper-thin walls. I can hear everything. Her neighbors arguing, cars honking all night, people coming and going at all hours." Jake nodded, though she couldn't see him. He watched her silhouette against the window and remembered all the evenings they had stood there together, talking about their days or just enjoying the view. "But the worst part," Lisa continued, turning to face him, "was how quiet it was when I was alone with my thoughts. All those sounds around me, but inside my head, everything was just silent." She moved away from the window and sat on the edge of the couch, the same spot where she used to curl up with her tea every evening. But instead of relaxing into it like she used to, she sat straight like she might need to leave quickly. "I kept thinking about our fight," she said. "About what I said and what you said. About what we didn't say." Jake sat down on the opposite end of the couch, leaving space between them. "I've been thinking about it too. I was angry at first, Lisa admitted. Really angry. I felt like you were just stringing me along, like you didn't want the same things I wanted. Jake felt a familiar knot form in his stomach. This was how their fight had started 3 weeks ago. But something was different about Lisa's voice now, less accusatory, more thoughtful. But then I realized I was angry at the wrong thing, she continued. I wasn't really angry at you for not being ready. I was angry at myself for being afraid to say what I really meant. Jake looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Lisa took a deep breath and looked directly at him for the first time since entering the apartment. When I said I wanted to talk about marriage and kids and the future, what I really meant was that I was scared you didn't want those things with me specifically. I was scared that maybe you were just comfortable, not actually happy. This wasn't what Jake had expected her to say. He had been preparing for another argument about timelines and commitment. Instead, she was talking about fear. I pushed you to make decisions because I thought that was the only way to know if you really wanted to be with me, Lisa explained. But that wasn't fair to either of us. Jake felt something shift inside his chest. The defensive wall he had built up over the past 3 weeks started to crumble just a little. I was scared too, he admitted quietly. Scared of making promises I couldn't keep. Scared of disappointing you. Scared of screwing up something that was already good. Lisa's expression softened. So we were both scared, and we both handled it. Badly. Yeah, I guess we did. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The apartment didn't feel quite so empty anymore. The familiar sounds were back. Lisa's soft breathing, the way she shifted slightly on the couch, the small sounds of another person sharing the space. But something was still different. There was a tension in the air that hadn't been there before their fight. Not a bad tension, but something charged and uncertain. Like they were both waiting for something to happen, but neither knew what it should be. Lisa stood up suddenly and walked back to the window. But this time, instead of looking out at the city, she turned and looked directly at Jake. There was something in her eyes he hadn't seen before, a kind of determination mixed with vulnerability. I didn't come here to have the same conversation we've had before, she said. Jake stood up too, sensing that something important was about to happen. Then why did you come? Lisa smiled slightly, and Jake saw a hint of the confident woman he had fallen in love with years ago. But there was something new there too, something that made his heart beat faster. Because sometimes, she said, taking a step toward him, the most important conversations don't happen with words. The air in the apartment seemed to change completely. Jake felt like he was standing on the edge of something, but he wasn't sure if he should jump or step back. Lisa was looking at him in a way she never had before, with an intensity that made him feel like she could see right through him. She took another step closer, and Jake realized that whatever was about to happen would either fix everything between them or break it completely. There was no middle ground anymore. Lisa reached up and slowly began to unzip her blue jacket. Not in a rush, but deliberately, like each movement was a decision she was making. The sound of the zipper seemed incredibly loud in the quiet room. Jake watched, mesmerized and confused at the same time. This wasn't like Lisa. She was usually careful, thoughtful about everything. She planned conversations and thought through consequences. But right now she seemed to be acting on pure instinct. What are you doing? Jake asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lisa slipped the jacket off her shoulders and let it fall to the floor. Underneath, she wore a simple white shirt, but somehow she looked completely different than she had moments before. More present, more alive. I'm showing you what I couldn't say with words, she replied. She reached up and pulled the elastic from her hair, letting it fall around her shoulders. Then she kicked off her shoes, first one, then the other. Each action was slow and purposeful, like she was shedding more than just clothing and accessories. Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. He understood what she was doing, but he couldn't quite believe it. This was Lisa, who always thought everything through twice. Lisa, who liked to talk through problems and make lists and plan for every possibility. But the woman standing in front of him now was someone different. Someone who had decided that some things were more important than being careful. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could feel the warmth from her skin, close enough to see the little flecks of gold in her brown eyes that he had always loved, but somehow forgotten during their weeks apart. "I spent 3 weeks trying to figure out the right words to say to you," Lisa said softly. "I wrote a dozen texts and deleted them all. I practiced conversations in the mirror. I asked my cousin for advice. But nothing felt right." Jake wanted to say something, but his voice seemed to have disappeared entirely. All he could do was look at her and try to understand what was happening. "Then I realized that words got us into this mess," Lisa continued. "We talked and talked and talked, but we never actually communicated. We never showed each other what we really meant." She reached out and touched his arm gently. Her fingers were warm against his skin, and Jake felt every nerve in his body come alive. "So I decided to stop talking," she said. And then, before Jake could process what was happening, Lisa stepped even closer and kissed him. It wasn't like their usual kisses. Those had been comfortable, familiar, the kind of kisses you share when you've been together for years and know exactly what to expect. This kiss was different. It was full of 3 weeks of missing each other, full of fear and hope and desperation and love all mixed together. Jake felt like the ground had shifted underneath his feet. All the careful walls he had built up, all the logical reasons why this was complicated, all the doubts and fears just melted away. For the first time in 3 weeks, everything felt right. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. Jake looked into Lisa's eyes and saw something he hadn't seen in months before their fight. Complete trust, complete openness. No walls, no defenses, no careful words chosen to avoid conflict. "I missed you," Jake whispered, finally finding his voice again. "I missed you too," Lisa replied. They stayed up talking until almost 3 in the morning. Not the careful walking on eggshells kind of talking they had been doing for months before their fight, but real conversation. The kind where you forget to check the time because you're too busy discovering things about each other you never knew. Lisa curled up on the couch with her legs tucked under her, wearing one of Jake's old college sweatshirts. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman he had first met at that coffee shop downtown 3 years ago. The woman who had laughed at his terrible jokes and challenged him to be better than he thought he could be. "I have something to admit," Lisa said, playing with the sleeves of the oversized sweatshirt. "The night we had our big fight, I didn't go straight to my cousin's place." Jake looked up from where he was sitting on the floor, leaning against the couch near her feet. "Where did you go?" "I sat in my car for 2 hours in the parking lot downstairs," she confessed. "I kept looking up at our window, hoping you would come down and find me." Jake felt a pang of regret in his chest. "Why didn't you come back up?" "Pride, I guess. I was waiting for you to chase after me like they do in movies. But real life isn't like that, is it?" Jake shook his head. "I wanted to come after you. I stood at that window for probably an hour after you left, hoping I'd see your car. But I was too stubborn to actually go look for you." They both laughed. But it was the kind of laughter that comes with realizing how foolish you've been. How many problems could have been solved if they had just swallowed their pride and been honest about what they really wanted. "We're both pretty terrible at this, aren't we?" Lisa said. "At fighting? Yeah, we're awful at it. No, at being vulnerable. At asking for what we need without making it sound like an ultimatum or a test." Jake thought about this. She was right. Somewhere along the way, they had both started treating their relationship like a negotiation instead of a partnership. Every conversation had become about winning or losing instead of understanding each other. "When I said I wasn't ready to talk about marriage and kids," Jake said carefully, "what I really meant was that I was scared I wasn't good enough for that kind of future with you." Lisa looked down at him with surprise. "What do you mean?" Jake had never said this out loud before, even to himself. But sitting here in the middle of the night, with Lisa looking at him without any judgment in her eyes, it felt safe to tell the truth. "Look at me," he said. "I'm 32 and I still don't have my life figured out. I hate my job. I don't have much money saved. I still eat cereal for dinner sometimes and forget to do laundry until I'm completely out of clean clothes. Lisa, smiled softly. You think I don't know all of that already? But when you talked about marriage and kids and buying a house, all I could think about was how I'd probably mess it all up, how I'd be a terrible husband or father because I can barely take care of myself. Lisa slid down from the couch to sit on the floor next to him. She took his hand and held it between both of hers. Jake, do you think I have my life figured out? I'm 29 and I still call my mom when I can't figure out how to cook something. I cry at commercials about dogs. Last week I spent 40 minutes looking for my phone while I was talking on it. Jake couldn't help but smile at that. He remembered the phone incident. But that's different, he protested. How is it different? Jake opened his mouth to explain but realized he didn't have a good answer. In his mind, Lisa had always seemed so much more put together than him. She had goals and plans and knew what she wanted, but maybe that was just because he had never asked her about her own fears and doubts. I guess I thought you needed someone who was more settled, more responsible. Lisa was quiet for a long moment, looking down at their joined hands. Can I tell you something? She said finally. The reason I was pushing so hard for us to make plans about the future wasn't because I had everything figured out. It was because I was terrified you were going to realize you could do better than me and leave. Now it was Jake's turn to be surprised. Are you serious? Dead serious. Every time we went out with your friends from work, or when we'd see couples who seemed to have perfect relationships, I'd wonder when you were going to notice that I'm not that special, that I'm just ordinary. Jake stared at her in amazement. Lisa, you're the smartest, funniest, most beautiful woman I've ever met. How could you think you're not special? Same way you can think you're not good enough for me, I guess. They sat there in silence, both processing this revelation. All this time they had been so busy protecting themselves from imaginary threats that they had stopped seeing each other clearly. We're both idiots, Jake said finally. Complete idiots, Lisa agreed. But she was smiling when she said it, and Jake realized that admitting they were both insecure and imperfect somehow made everything better instead of worse. So what do we do with this information? Jake asked. Lisa leaned her head against his shoulder. Maybe we stop trying to be perfect for each other and just try to be honest instead. Honest about being scared and confused and not having everything figured out, especially about that. Jake put his arm around Lisa and pulled her closer. The apartment felt different now, not empty or too quiet, but full of possibility, like they had cleared out a bunch of old furniture and could finally see how much space they actually had to work with. I want to try again, Jake said, but I want to do it right this time. What does doing it right look like? Jake thought about this. No more pretending to be more confident than I actually am. No more avoiding difficult conversations because I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing. No more testing you to see if you really want to be with me, Lisa added. No more assuming I know what you're thinking without actually asking. And maybe we could try talking about the future without it feeling like a job interview. Lisa laughed. Yeah, that would be nice. They talked for another hour about practical things. Lisa would move back in gradually, not all at once. They would set up regular times to check in with each other about how they were feeling, instead of letting problems build up until they exploded. They would be more patient with each other's fears and more honest about their own. But the most important thing they agreed on was something that couldn't be planned or scheduled. They would try to remember what had brought them together in the first place, the way they used to laugh together, the way they used to share their dreams without being afraid of judgment, the way they used to just enjoy being in the same room together. As the sun started to come up outside their window, casting soft light across the living room, Jake realized something had fundamentally changed between them. Not just because they had worked through their problems, but because they had discovered something new about each other. Something deeper and more real than what they had before. I love you, Jake said, and for the first time in months, the words felt completely true and uncomplicated. I love you too, Lisa replied. The real you, not the perfect version you think I want. Jake kissed the top of her head and watched the city wake up outside their window. For the first time in a long time, he was excited about the future, not because he had everything figured out, but because he had someone who wanted to figure it out together with him. 6 months later, Jake was standing in that same spot by the window, but everything was different. The apartment looked lived in. Again, Lisa's books were scattered around the coffee table. Her plants had taken over half the windowsill. The refrigerator was full of actual food instead of leftover pizza and questionable milk. But the biggest change wasn't in how the apartment looked. It was in how it felt. Like a home instead of just a place where someone happened to sleep. Jake was making coffee when Lisa emerged from the bedroom, her hair messy from sleep and wearing one of his t-shirts. 6 months ago, this would have been just another ordinary morning. Now Jake found himself appreciating these small moments in a way he never had before. "Good morning," Lisa said, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind while he waited for the coffee to finish brewing. "Good morning," Jake replied, leaning back into her embrace. This had become their routine, not because they had planned it, but because it had evolved naturally. Small gestures of affection that reminded them both that they had chosen to be here together. "I have something to tell you," Lisa said, and Jake heard something different in her voice. He turned around to face her, suddenly alert. Over the past 6 months, they had gotten much better at reading each other's moods and tones. This sounded like important news. "What is it?" Jake asked. Lisa smiled, but Jake could see she was nervous about something. "You know how I've been taking those night classes in graphic design?" Jake nodded. Lisa had enrolled in community college courses a few months ago, saying she wanted to learn new skills and maybe change career directions. Jake had been supportive, but he hadn't realized how serious she was about it. "Well, I've been working on a portfolio, and last week I applied for a job at that design firm downtown, the one that does all the cool advertising campaigns." Jake felt his heart speed up. This was big news. Lisa had been talking about wanting to do more creative work for years, but she had always been too scared to actually pursue it. "And?" Jake prompted. "They called yesterday. I got the job." Jake let out a whoop of excitement and picked Lisa up, spinning her around the small kitchen. When he set her down, both of them were laughing and breathless. "Lisa, that's incredible. I'm so proud of you." "The only thing is," Lisa said, and Jake heard the nervousness creep back into her voice, "it's a pretty big change. Different hours, less money at first, a lot more challenges." Jake could see where this was going. The old Lisa, the one from before their big fight and reconciliation, would have been asking for permission, checking to make sure he was okay with her making a major life change that might affect both of them. But the new Lisa, the one who had learned to be honest about what she wanted, was telling him about a decision she had already made. She was sharing the news with him, not asking for approval. "Are you excited about it?" Jake asked. Lisa's face lit up. "Terrified and excited. It's everything I've wanted to do for years, but I never thought I was good enough." "You are good enough," Jake said firmly. "You're more than good enough." "I know," Lisa said, and Jake realized she actually did know. That was another change over the past 6 months. They had both gotten better at believing in themselves and each other. "There's something else," Lisa continued. "The job comes with really good health insurance and a retirement plan, and they said there's a lot of room for advancement if I work hard." Jake understood the significance of this. Lisa was talking about building a real career, not just working a job to pay the bills. She was talking about investing in her future. "That sounds amazing," Jake said. "I was thinking," Lisa said carefully, "that maybe this would be a good time for us to start making some of those plans we talked about. Nothing set in stone, but just thinking about what we want our life to look like in a few years." 6 months ago, this conversation would have sent Jake into a panic. Talk about the future had felt like pressure, like tests he might fail. But now it just sounded like Lisa sharing her dreams with him. "What kind of plans?" Jake asked. "Maybe we could start looking at houses. Nothing fancy, just something that's actually ours, with a yard where we could plant a garden. and maybe an extra room that could be a proper office for both of us. Jake found himself actually getting excited about the idea. That sounds really nice. And maybe in a year or two we could talk about getting married. Not because we feel like we have to, but because we want to make it official. Have a party with our friends and families. Jake realized that the idea of marrying Lisa didn't scare him anymore. It actually made him happy to think about. And maybe someday after that, if we're both ready, we could think about kids. Jake looked at Lisa. Really looked at her. 6 months ago, she had been talking about these same things, but it had felt like demands or ultimatums. Now, it just sounded like dreams she wanted to share with him. "You know what the difference is?" Jake said. "What?" "Before, when you talked about the future, it felt like you were asking me to prove something, like I had to convince you I was serious about us." Lisa nodded thoughtfully. "And now?" "Now it feels like you're inviting me to dream with you. Like we're on the same team trying to figure out what we want to build together." Lisa smiled and kissed him softly. "We are on the same team." Jake thought about how much had changed since that night 6 months ago, when Lisa had shown up at his door and kissed him without asking. They had learned to communicate without words, but they had also learned to communicate better with words. They had learned to be vulnerable without being defensive. They had learned to make plans without making demands. Most importantly, they had learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone you wanted to grow with, someone you trusted to see your fears and imperfections and choose to stay anyway. "So," Jake said, pouring them both coffee and handing Lisa her favorite mug, "tell me more about this house with a yard." And as Lisa started describing her vision of their future together, Jake realized that for the first time in his adult life, the future didn't feel scary. It felt like an adventure he was excited to begin. Outside their window, the city was waking up to another ordinary day, but inside their apartment, Jake and Lisa were planning an extraordinary life together. Not perfect, but honest. Not without challenges, but full of possibility. And Jake knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. With words when they needed them, and without words when that was better. With courage when they felt brave, and with honesty when they felt scared. But always, always together.